Welcome to the Blue Yonder Overland podcast. I'm your main host, Jen, and we're here to inspire and empower you to spend more time outside however works for you, but especially to make overlanding more approachable. Each week, we provide practical advice for vehicle-based adventures, either focused on a topic or featuring interviews with people who are out there doing it, sharing lessons learned, and empowering you to spend more nights under the stars. Feel free to send us any questions or comments at Blue Yonder Jen at Instagram or Threads, and hopefully we'll see you out in the wild Blue Yonder. Hi friends, today I want to dive into a topic that's not explicitly camping related, although I will have a few camping tips thrown in as well. But it's for everybody who is trying to get more time outside, however that works for you and your family, your stage of life, where you're at, but finding it difficult just with all of the things you're trying to juggle in your daily life, your job, kids, family, other obligations. And so as I've learned how to better integrate adventure into my own life over the last few years, I wanted to share some of the strategies and tips that me and my husband Matt have used the last few years to really build more adventure into our lives. And so I'll be going over some practical planning tips, as well as talking through some of the ways we prep for camping that can just make it easier to get out. I think this is the group of campers and adventurers that I'm most interested in connecting with on this podcast, simply because it's the category that I'm in most of the time. Even this spring, we thought we were going to be living full time on the road out of our trailer for roughly 3 months. But so many different factors have changed, and with all of the changes, including having access to our house in Kingston again earlier than we thought we were going to, we are actually this week in the process of moving all of our stuff back to our home in Kingston, getting unpacked, getting additional stuff here. And so it's a bit of a crazy couple of weeks. And it's also opening up the horizon to doing more camping here locally. But also Matt's working situation is changing so that he's going to be probably needing to be doing more on-sites and travel. And so that's also going to be impacting our camping plans as well. So all of this has got me thinking about the strategies that we will use for planning adventures the rest of the year, and thought that it might also be helpful to share with those of you who aren't full-time van lifers, have no ability or desire to get on the road full-time, but do want to be building in more adventures. And that is, I think, the category that me and Matt are going to be in probably the rest of our lives. It just seems to work the best with all of our other needs and lifestyle and all of the other demands. And so that's where I think I have some practical advice to offer from tips that we found building adventure in, and then also sort of how to keep that adventurous spirit alive during the weeks or months or whole seasons where you're just not able to get out much and have your own new adventures for whatever reason. I have to be honest about today's episode. I'm also coming at this from a bit of a selfish mindset. I need these reminders as well, because our plans have just gone topsy-turvy all over the place the last month and a half. And I'm sitting recording this actually in our trailer, which is now plugged into our electrical outlet in our house in Kingston, Washington. We've got solar panels on the roof, so we've got giant batteries, and we're able to take advantage of those to recharge our electric trailer, which is pretty great. It also, I've discovered, it makes the perfect recording studio because the insulation is so good in the trailer. So it's perfect for sound insulation. And it also just helps me feel a little bit more connected to the idea of camping and adventure if I'm recording it from our camping trailer. So I'm doing all of that to kind of keep the adventurous spirit alive in me this week, even while I'm dealing on a day-to-day basis with all of the fun logistics of a cross-country move, including getting our belongings here from 2 different locations. And I'm actually flying to South Dakota, and then we'll be driving back with a bunch more stuff later this week. So the move isn't done. We're unpacking a lot. We're ambitiously deciding to repaint some of the things in our house this week as well. So we started doing that before our moving pods arrived that we'd put into storage. So it's just been a mess. And it's one of those weeks where I need the reminder of how important adventure is in our day-to-day lives. And so I'm actually taking a lot of my own advice that I'm doling out here this week to just remind myself that even if I'm not having adventures this week, other than moving, which of course is an adventure in and of itself, that I'm still an adventurous person, and that even if it's just taking a break for a lunch hour, it's worth doing and worth embracing the adventure right in front of us. So that's the mindset I'm coming at it from today. So hopefully, wherever you're at in life right now and in the world, you can also find a way to embrace the adventures right around you. Trying something new and adding in some editorial notes as I listen back through the podcast. And this week, I've really been thinking and discussing with a few different people about the limitations we place on ourselves, about whether we're going to embrace our dreams or think that we can do the adventures, are brave enough to start the adventures that we want to have, and just all the ways that we can limit ourselves. So that's a theme I want to explore a little bit more with some of our future guests as well. I was reminded while at the Overland Expo in Southern California and walking around talking to people with my sister-in-law, Alex Hager. She was a great reminder for me that sometimes all it takes is having a champion in our corner, somebody to encourage you to take that next step, or to encourage you that, no, you're not crazy. You do want to do this thing. And that might be all that you need to get over that initial hump of taking that action. And so that was a really good reminder for me of surrounding yourself with people who believe in your dreams and adventures and want to help you make them happen. And that's a small part too of why I wanted to start this podcast, and to kind of be that encouraging for you to take steps on your adventures. And so that's why I'm excited to dive into today just some of the very practical sort of tips around scheduling and how to make time and intentional action towards the adventures that you want to have in your life. So, without further ado, we'll dive into those tips today. I think one of the hardest things about fitting more nights under the stars or more outdoor adventures into your life is honestly just being intentional about it and planning time to actually step back, look at your calendar as a whole for however many months out you can, and really thinking strategically about how to arrange things to fit more adventures and more time outside in. So I'm going to start with some of the tips we use around planning, and then I'll go into some practical tips concerning camping advice, packing advice, where to go, and we'll look at some of those easy wins you might be able to fit in. And then I also want to talk about the time where you simply don't have the time. You don't have the time to get out and camp even for an overnight or for a weekend. So how do you keep that adventurous spirit alive when you're not going to be able to get out there for whatever reason? And so what things can you do or build in or have as sort of tangible reminders, or reminders that can help you maintain that link to your adventurous spirit and the benefits that you get out of these outdoor activities? So first of all, let's dive into practically, how do you fit more adventures into your schedule? So one strategy that Matt and I have used since we got together is to sit down basically on a seasonal basis. So this ends up happening probably 3 or 4 times a year for us. And since we both worked a regular sort of 9 to 5 job with commutes sometimes remote when we got together, we would sit down and chart out all of the weekend dates. And there's obviously tons of ways to do this. And if you like to organize your life on a Google Calendar, it might just be easiest to do it on Google. I found it easiest to actually physically get a sheet of paper, list out the holidays and weekend dates in a column, and then also make a list. And I use the same sheet of paper, made a list of all the plans, commitments, promises we'd made, obligations that we had, whether it was weddings we had to attend or a family reunion, or knowing that we had promised to do Thanksgiving holidays with one of our families, or knowing that we really wanted to make sure we got a visit into Matt's grandparents. So we would just sit down and write all of those things that we knew we wanted to fit into the next couple of months. And we'd sketch out then also what the weekends looked like for the next 3 months or so. And I have so much sympathy for those of you that are trying to do this with families and kids, especially those who are involved in any sort of organized sports or activities, because once you do this, your schedule's probably full. I would also encourage you, though, in that list of the obligations and things that you know you have to fit in, to also list some things that you want to do seasonally, things that you are just excited about that you don't have to do, but that you would be really excited to get a chance to do. And this is where that seasonal fun activity can come in. So if you're approaching winter, like maybe you're sitting down to do this towards the end of October or early November, we might be charting out then kind of Thanksgiving, December, January, February, and thinking about winter activities we want to do. Maybe we know that we want to try to get in a day of downhill skiing. Maybe we know that we would love to get out cross-country skiing to 2 different areas this year. For instance, there's actually some skiing and snowshoeing you can do up at Hurricane Ridge in the Olympic National Park. We tried to snowshoe one day, but I think Matt forgot his boots, and so he was trying to do it in tennis shoes. So tennis shoes and snowshoes, and it did not work that well. So that's still on our list of things to do. But there's also great cross-country skiing and snowshoeing over in the Lake Wenatchee State Park area on the other side of the Cascades. And then, of course, there's all the downhill ski resorts in Washington. So we always have a lot of winter activities that we're trying to fit on the list. We also usually have a lot of friends that we're trying to get together with, people that live on one side or other of the water. And so then that is one strategy that we'll do, is as we list all the winter activities we want to do, including camping, because we love winter camping, oftentimes then I'll see what we can combine. So oftentimes we could combine a winter camping weekend with a chance to try out cross-country skiing or snowshoeing in an area. And so maybe then we'd also try to combine it as a friend weekend. If there's a set of friends or a couple people we're trying to see if they also enjoy this activity, try to get that whole thing scheduled together so we know, okay, we're going to see these friends that we really have been talking about getting together but haven't found the time. We're going to plan this weekend, go cross-country skiing and camping with them. Great. And then kind of work through our list that way. So that's also then you'll quickly realize, of course, your limits of weekends and holidays. And so then we'll also put PTO into the mix. And of course, that might be a yearly conversation, planning around that with your job. But generally, we'll use this as an opportunity to sort of take stock of our PTO and see if there are the odd day here and there we can afford to build in, especially if we're looking out, like I said, 3 or 4 months and realizing that all of our weekends are filled. This happened quite a bit in the early days of me and Matt being together because it was right after COVID and it seemed like everybody was scheduling, whether it was family events or weddings, there was something like every weekend. And so if we weren't careful, a whole season could go by and we wouldn't have gotten out camping, or we wouldn't have been able to go cross country skiing or any of the snow activities that we like to do. And so that's then an area where we'd be like, oh, okay, we're going to reach the end of March and not made it skiing. Well, is there a long weekend that we could take? Or is there a day or two somewhere where we could take off and then make time for that activity so we know we can actually do it this year? But otherwise, it's crazy how the seasons can just fly by. And if you're not careful, you'll realize it's been years since you went kayaking or went cross-country skiing or did whatever fun outdoors activities that you want to be a part of your life. And so this was one way where we could kind of guarantee that at least seasonally, we were taking advantage of what each season had to offer here in Washington. And of course, it'll be different wherever you are, where you live and what activities you like to do. But we did find the seasonal planning routine to be helpful, just to be sort of intentional about what we were getting a chance to do and to realize the trade-offs that we were making and to recognize like, okay, this schedule means that we're only going to get out camping by ourselves one weekend, but we are going to get to go camping with friends another weekend and maybe get to go camping with family this other weekend on the way to some other obligation. So then that might also dictate our overlanding plans in terms of, do we want to try to check out a new site? Do we have the time and the flexibility to do that? Or if we're acting as sort of a host for this camping weekend with friends, do we need to go somewhere where we've already vetted the site? We know what to expect. We know what vehicle types would be able to access it, and we know what activities are nearby. And so we'd be a little more comfortable planning a group trip somewhere usually where we've already been. So that's just one example of then how that, knowing those plans in advance and fitting in who's going where, who's doing what with us, can help us also decide when we're going to set aside time for discovery of campsites versus revisiting known and loved campsites. So after some seasonal planning, another strategy that we would use, like I mentioned, is to try to turn family or friend get-togethers into camping adventures. So the more friends and family you can get into camping, then obviously the more camping adventures or outdoor activities you can fit into your life. So this is one of the big reasons why we are always a proponent of trying to convert everyone we know to camping. And it's another reason why we really try to make group camping trips as fun as possible and try to really demonstrate the full spectrum of activities and cooking and activities that you get to do while out camping. Really trying to sell people on how it might be different than their conception of camping. And so we'll always try to plan at least one weekend each season where we're getting out camping with people, whether it's people who have done it a lot or people who are brand new to it. That might also dictate what sort of campsite you're going to. Like I've mentioned before, especially if it's folks with different needs for bathrooms or families with small children, that might also dictate how far from the campground or how far from established trails you're able to get. Another strategy we've used is to keep a running list or map, really, of sites that we've identified that are a very quick trip to get to from both our home as well as other spots like family or friends' houses. Or for instance, if we know we're going to have to take somebody to the airport or pick one of us up, maybe it's a site that's on the drive around the Puget Sound from the airport getting out to Kingston, then maybe down near Rainier, we could go overnight. And so we've got some kind of easy, close spots as well as backup sites for those. And so those might not be our favorite sites, but they would allow us to get a night outside. And so we kind of have those in our back pockets. So if plans change or if we can fit in a quick overnight on the way to something else, that's a possibility. We also have started, especially seasonally, to keep things sort of prepped and packed with sort of a go bag for an overnight or weekend adventure so that we can basically be ready to go in about 10 minutes. And that really is just kind of making sure I have things like contacts or replenish anything like that where we can't live without it, grabbing any sort of food, drinks to throw in and getting on the road. But we'll keep our setup, our overland vehicle, however we're set up to go out that season. We'll keep it sort of packed and ready to go and try when we get back from a trip to immediately turn things over, restock anything that needs it, like for our dry stores that Matt mentioned in our cooking episode, or just kind of get rid of trash, replenish anything like wipes or things that get consumed. That way it's ready to take out and turn around if we do get a last minute chance, or if we're going to try and fit in even just a quick overnight. Sometimes though, despite all of your best intentions and strategic planning, you realize that it's just not going to be possible to get out as a family or as a couple for all the adventures that you want to have. So what do you do in that case? Well, we've tried a few different things. For starters, sometimes you might just need a reset individually. And so maybe you can find a time where one of you is able to get away from work, maybe take an extra PTO day, or maybe just one of you is needed for an obligation on a weekend. And so the other person might be able to get a solo overnight. Matt has done that winter camping to test out a little bit of a winter setup, and I couldn't get away, but he could. So he went out on a quick overnight to test out some gear. Another example is last summer when Matt was super busy with work, then I got out for a night of backpacking with my sister. I have another good friend from high school, Amy. Her husband, Chad, actually flew her out here for a weekend of hiking and exploring the Olympic National Park with me right after the COVID lockdowns lifted and the vaccines were out. And Chad recognized that Amy really needed a break and needed to get a little adventure in her life. And so we were able to get out hiking and kayaking here. And all of those examples are just reminders that even if you can only make it work for just you, even for one night, even for an afternoon, whether it's a hike or kayak, some small adventure is worth it sometimes for that reset. And that kind of leads me to then another set of ideas. If you don't have time for a full overnight of camping, think about what else can help bring out the same benefits that you specifically get from camping. So for me, it's that sense of discovery and learning that really I notice when we're out, mapping new places, finding new campsites, but it's also getting to see and experience something new. So I might try a new activity, even if I don't have time to get out camping. We might try a new activity together or individually, something that might be outside our comfort zone. This is often, funny enough, something that I like to try to sprinkle on my first dates back when I was dating a lot in Seattle. It's hilarious how doing something that is new for even one person in a couple, like on a date, or if me and Matt go and try something, is often enough to just totally reset our sense of normal or the vibe that we would have. So if one person has done it before and the other hasn't, it's really interesting I think, to notice the dynamics at play, how good that other person is at being a gracious teacher or a host, or how the other person might embrace humility of learning something new, or what it's like for them to be in that position of maybe not being as good at something as their partner is. Or for both of you, if you're trying something new, just what it's like to experience something totally outside both of your comfort zones. That can also be really interesting. So I'm a big fan of trying to sprinkle in totally new activities, whether it's dating or just in your relationship or family life. I think that's one way of trying to keep a sense of discovery alive. Another thing is I've mentioned before, just not overlooking your local parks or local nature spots, maybe appreciating a neighbor's front yard garden on a walk. But finding those little hidden gems, oftentimes there's little pocket parks, little block long forests, all these little urban oases that are scattered throughout. Back when I was living over in West Seattle has a ton of really, really cool parks and greenways and places you can kind of go on little urban hikes. And some were by the water, some weren't, but it really provided an endless exploration routes, even just around the West Seattle Peninsula. Another idea would be if it's just sort of that greenery and sense of being around nature that you think is the biggest benefit for you in getting out camping or in outdoor adventures, then maybe spend some time in a garden or plant a garden or plant an over the rail little planter if you're in an apartment with a balcony, or get a new plant for indoors. Just something small, fresh, that's beautiful to look at on a daily basis. And that might be enough to kind of remind you of a sense of wonder at the natural world. I used to do that occasionally when I lived in Uganda. If I was having a particularly rough week, I might treat myself to either a new plant or even just a bouquet of flowers that I could keep in a vase and keep them cut fresh and freshly watered to keep them alive for a couple of weeks. And that was a really nice way of just brightening my immediate surroundings and getting sort of that sense of just pausing for one moment to appreciate nature. I found that super helpful. Another idea would just be maybe stargazing in your own backyard or off your balcony if you live in an apartment, looking up whatever the next full moon or meteor shower is and putting that on your calendar and making a special effort to step out. Or maybe it's watching. We've been getting a ton of the Northern Lights possible sightings over the last year in the northern United States. And we were lucky enough to see them on a ferry ride coming from Seattle to Kingston last spring when we were actually moving stuff out of the apartment. And we were falling asleep. It was pretty late coming back on the ferry from having dinner with some friends. And somebody came running into the upper passenger deck of the ferry and was just exclaiming, "The Northern Lights! You can see them! The Northern Lights! Everyone come out and look!" And we were so glad we did. And just being able to stand there and see these shifting magical lights from the ferry was such a cool experience. So don't forget that experiences like that can be had even on your normal commuting route or from your backyard. And then, of course, I think another idea for if you don't have time to get out on any sort of adventure, I like to try to think about how I can keep the adventurous spirit alive, especially if I know it's going to be several weeks before I am going to get out camping. Then there's lots of ideas that I've tried for kind of keeping that sense of adventure close to me, even when I am not going to be really actively living it out. So I've done this by making time for midweek, after, before work, or even lunch activities. When I was going through a pretty stressful period of work back when I worked for the refugee aid nonprofit IRC, they do awesome work. We're settling refugees and also helping survivors of trafficking get their lives restarted here in the Seattle area. And I was in a particularly busy season of submitting grants and funding applications. And so then sometimes I would just deliberately take an hour-long lunch break and take a lunch out to one of the parks that I could get to within about a 15-minute drive of the office, and just walk along a path to the shoreline or to a picnic table and just eat my lunch outside. That was super helpful. And then after I submitted a grant one day, because I'd been working such long hours, I left work like an hour early and got out to Rattlesnake Ledge, which is a pretty iconic hike over towards Snoqualmie. But it's usually packed on the weekends because it's so close to Seattle. And I think it's less than 5 miles round trip. It offers amazing views. It's a really popular engagement and photo spot. So you'll always come up and see people spread out like a picturesque picnic, or they're busy taking Instagram reels. So on the weekends, it can be kind of chaotic, but wow, going out there on a work day was just a totally different experience. I met a friend out there, and it was just, we had the whole place to ourselves really. And it was just gorgeous. And because it was a pretty well-known trail, even though we were descending, we didn't wait up for sunset at the top of the ledge, but we were descending as the sun was going down. And so we made sure we had headlights along. But because it was such a well-known and fairly easy trail, especially on the bottom, it was fine. And that was a good reminder for me that some of these shorter places, whether it's parks or hikes that I might write off on the weekends because I think they're too busy or I want to get out in a more secluded area, the experience might be totally different midweek. And so just not forgetting about those other options that might be open to you if you're just willing to do them at a slightly different time or have an opportunity to rearrange your schedule even a little bit during the week. Another thing I might do on a week where I don't have any adventures planned, or if I'm finding myself getting into a rut and kind of getting down on myself for not getting out and doing more. This obviously during COVID, I think we all probably struggled with this, where sometimes it just felt overwhelming to try to preserve any sort of sense of normal routine and to do the things that we knew were going to be good for us, especially things like getting outside. And so for times like that, I find it very helpful to chat with somebody who evokes an adventurous spirit and sort of feeds that adventurous and creative side of me. And so I really tried to pay attention when I really feel that sort of energy fed within a friendship or with a conversation. One of the best people for me to talk to is my sister, Megan, who I had on the podcast earlier. And we actually talked about embracing an adventurous mindset. But we can start a conversation discussing the most mundane details of our workday or what we have to do that week and how we might be feeling about it. But by the end of it, usually we're both just bubbling over with this sort of contagious energy and planning something, anything, whether it's we're going to go home and start a new craft project. She got really into different types of sewing and all sorts of crafty projects, embroidery. The last couple of years, we got into leather making the last year, which was really cool to explore. Just a quick editorial note to add that, of course, I didn't actually mean leather making as I think about it. It's more embossing leather. So we got to try out all sorts of fun new tools to emboss and dye leather. So we made some leather bookmarks and starting to make some Western style leather belts as well. And so usually just even a half-hour conversation with her in person or over the phone is enough to kind of break me out of any sort of rut that I'm in and get me in that more adventurous and creative mindset. And I do think for me too, I would imagine this is probably true for a lot of you. I think there's a strong link between sort of a creative energy and an adventurous energy. And so sometimes if I can't do an activity I would classify as adventurous, then I might embrace a creative activity or vice versa. And so the conversations I have with my sister really just get all of those juices flowing, and in a way that kind of breaks me out of if I am getting into a sort of rut or feeling down about the fact that I don't have an adventure planned or that I didn't finish that creative project. Usually a chat with her is enough to kind of reset my attitude and kind of re-embrace just the simple joy of attempting these things, even if I don't ultimately finish a project or if I'm not planning on getting out for some sort of hardcore adventure anytime soon. Usually a conversation with her will do the trick and kind of get my mind reset. So figure out who that is for you. Maybe it's a friend that you've done a camping trip with or a hiking trip. And even if it's just talking to them and reminiscing about it, that might be enough to get you kind of jump started. Otherwise, talk to them about how you're feeling and wanting to build more adventure into your day-to-day life. And maybe they'll have some ideas for you. As another editorial aside, I just want to say thanks. If you are one of these people, for me, you know who you are. Those people who just excite you with new ideas and enthusiasm for whatever creative or adventurous project you're considering. Those are the conversations that really light me up and encourage me and just make me excited to get out and pursue all of these things. So thank you if you have those conversations with me. And if you want to have more of them, I would love to discuss your adventures with you. On that same note of reminiscing, another thing that I've tried to kind of keep the adventure alive during the maybe more off seasons or times where I just can't get out is looking back on photos or memories that I have that I've captured of an adventure and making them into some sort of keepsake, or maybe printing out a photo and framing it, doing something with the memories to kind of keep them alive and re-examine them. And sometimes I might notice things that I didn't in the experience itself. I know if you're like me, I'm fairly bad about capturing photos to begin with, but then sometimes I'll take all these photos from like a trip or something and then never look at them for months. And then if I am in a period where suddenly I'm not traveling or not able to, or can't get out, or there's too much going on, sometimes I find it very helpful to go back and look at the photos and be like, oh yeah, I did do things. Like I do have adventures. I do try new things. I am making an effort to get out and experience life to the fullest with the people that I care about most. And here's proof. So I find going back through old photos really helpful for that, and have had a good time. Me and Matt have organized a couple of our little adventures, or maybe just a look back at a year, into printable photo books that you can just do even on Shutterfly. But we've also printed some photos to kind of make our own handwritten scrapbook as well. And then even just framing a photo and keeping it maybe near your dresser where you get dressed every morning. Maybe that will be enough of a motivation for you if you're having a tough time keeping to, maybe it's a workout routine, which will keep you in shape to do hiking or the skiing adventures that you want to do. Finding ways to put those reminders of the person that you want to be, that adventurous person, in front of you where you're going to see them every day. Or maybe it's framing a quote that really inspires you about creativity or adventure and putting that where you're going to see it every day. Finding those little ways to remind yourself, I think, of the person that you want to be is so valuable. And that can really help keep your adventurous spirit alive, even in those weeks where, for whatever reasons, whatever curveballs life has thrown you, you're just not going to be able to get outside or camp or do the activity that you want to do. So those are some of the things that have worked for me over the years. Is there anything that's worked particularly well for you? I would love to hear about it if there is. Feel free to send me a comment or a note on any of the Instagram or Threads posts that I put up. I will post some of the behind the scenes photos of different things I've done, or examples of some of these, whether it's new activities or memories looking back at adventures, but just things to sort of keep the adventures alive even during a tough season of life. I would love to hear about those if you've got your own special tips and tricks for getting through those. So I think that's where we'll wrap up today. We've done both sort of the mindset reminders, talked a little bit about the social aspect of maybe encouraging friends or family to come out with you, seeing if you can turn some of those get-togethers or family obligations into camping adventures themselves. We've talked a little bit about camping advice and identifying some close and easy spots, or spots that are near other trips or other things that you've already planned, as well as how you can get your overland vehicle or camping setup easily prepped and kind of on standby mode so that it's real easy to pivot last minute and go camping if plans change or something falls through and you get a last minute opportunity. That has really helped us take advantage of more nights. And then, of course, not overlooking just the new experiences, adventures, and activities that can be found right in your own backyard or right in your own neighborhood, and not underestimating the effect that those might have on you too. So that's where we'll leave it for today. And next week, I'll be back with more. I've got a couple of really exciting interviews lined up in the next couple of weeks. So very excited to get to bring on some fresh new ideas and energy for you. And I think they'll have some really great ideas about trying out different camping setups, as well as camping with family, and just a lot of great advice. So I'm really excited to bring some special guests your way in the next couple episodes. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hey there, if you made it all the way to the end of this podcast, I just wanted to take a moment and say thanks for listening. If you're brand new to the concept of overlanding and want to learn more, I'd recommend checking out our first 2 episodes on why we love it so much and how to find campsites beyond the campground. Of course, I'm also available at blueyonderoverlandpodcast at Instagram or Threads for any questions or comments, and really appreciate your time today. I'll be back next week with more.